Okay, so what I wanted to show in this video was just some of the techniques that I've been building for creating essentially drafts for my manga future savers. So here are a range of drafts basically that I have completed pretty much for essentially what would be part 5 of the manga. So what I want to show you is basically how I go about creating a draft like this, and everything starts off actually before the draft stage with the storyboard. Now, rightly or wrongly, my storyboards are probably a bit too detailed, I think, but they just always seem to end up coming out this way. I mean, I didn't go into any great detail about Saki's house in this case, where she returns home, this being Saki, by the way, because I know what that looks like, so I don't need to go into any great detail. But yeah, so from this, I can actually begin to work out the draft. Now, sometimes it ends up with basically the same layouts. You know, I've divided this up into various panels and so forth for this page, but sometimes it does get a little bit changed. So here's a clean sheet of manga paper. I used Deleter. B4 size manga paper, the standard size, and the reason for this is because this is the paper that I'll ink onto as well. So using the tracing table that is underneath here, voila, that's how I basically will create the ink copy. So I'm not going to cover the inking today. This is basically just drafting. So one of the things at this stage that I always seem to do is that it might not come out on camera, but very faintly there are basically the guides for like where the page, like the safe area as it were. So essentially it's recommended that any dialogue that you have sort of fits in within this area, but otherwise the actual extent of the page is obviously all the way over to here. But bear in mind anything between these points here, so I'm just going to draw a little arrow so you can see, anything between these 2 points here could potentially get trimmed if it was printed onto sort of an actual manga volume and so forth. So, but otherwise I use this paper because it's pretty much industry standard and it's very good, and living in Japan it's easy for me to get hold of. But I always put these little crosshairs here because it gives me a bit of an idea that when I come to actually put this little layout together, where am I going to be drawing towards. And the other thing that I also need to consider is that before I start changing that is how it's going to compare with its opposite page essentially. So obviously this is Japanese reading order, so it starts obviously over on the right hand side and works its way across, down and so forth. So, but not only that, but it's nice to actually get some sort of consistency so that things flow nicely. So I can see that, you know, these panels here sort of come to this point here, which is around about the just over the 5 centimeter mark. So I might want to maintain that, I might split it up, but I just need to be aware of what I've done on the opposite page, just so that things flow and fit together nicely, because it's not always about how each individual page looks, it can also be about how the overall spread looks. And the last thing that I'm going to mention before I just crack on with a bit of working up this draft is that very rarely on the draft stage these days will I use a ruler anymore. You can see on this page there were some architectural details drawn in, like buildings and so forth, but really I've found that I don't really need to use a ruler at this stage. As I've been sort of working on my drawing skills and so forth over the last you know, sort of, well, 4 years really, but probably more intensely over the last couple of years here in Japan, I just find that I don't really need to use a ruler at draft stage. One, because I'll correct it when it actually comes to being inked, but also just generally I'm better at creating a straight line, so, you know, just by freehand. So that's enough waffle. Let me just basically put this together, and I'll record a few snips of it at a time. I just want to quickly point out the equipment that I'm using. I don't want to dwell on this too much because there are no rights and wrongs about this, well, within reason. But I always have a large eraser. This is just good for erasing large areas. And then, not that I have it immediately to hand, but I then have smaller erasers. Here's some that have fallen out the packet earlier. So a smaller version of that, although it's a new one. And I tend to draft usually with a slightly harder pencil. These are 2H pencils. Not everybody's cup of tea, to be fair. A lot of people actually prefer something quite a bit softer, like a B or a 2B pencil. I actually probably overall prefer HB pencils, but most important piece of equipment that I can really recommend is a really good pencil sharpener. So this is a Carl manual rotary pencil sharpener, an Angel 5 Royal. Quite expensive outside of Japan, and not that it's cheap in Japan, but pretty much one of the more pricey models that they make, but it leads to a very nice sharp pencil, and I feel that that can't be overlooked. Just quickly, what I have here is basically the Endo household, Saki's house. This is from part 2. It's quite interesting actually looking back at this, how much my drawing skills have rapidly improved over the course of doing this manga, but I just need that as a reference to how the front of the house looks. Okay, so it's another day. In fact, it's probably 2 days after the last recording. So I just wanted to show you where this is going. So this is where the draft is now. And you'll see that basically I've just got one frame or one panel left to sort of fill in down the bottom there, which I'm going to do to finish this up. But as you can see, it's developed quite a bit from the original storyboard idea. The storyboard isn't really a layout per se, it's more just a visualization of ideas and an idea of a layout, but this one has stuck relatively close to storyboards, probably because, as I say, I end up putting a bit too much thought into actually creating them sometimes. But you'll notice that actually on this frame, for example, I put some arrows here, and that's just because I've got the scale slightly, or the position slightly wrong, where Saki's dad should be a bit taller and so forth. So what I can do with the tracing table is I can just literally shift this draft underneath the actual piece of paper that I'm going to be tracing with ink onto, so that way I can get her position correct relative to her dad and so forth. But if it's anything other than the position of people, like for example I've drawn them way too big or way too small, or something's in the wrong place completely and all the rest of it, of course I get it right on the draft stage. But for things like that, I'm okay with actually just putting a couple of arrows in just to say that Saki's dad needs to move up a little bit and she just needs to move a little bit over towards the right and down just a little bit. Towards the right mostly because I think I just need a bit more room for the speech bubbles. So, but yeah, otherwise you can see how I changed the way that Saki's house was drawn and so forth. I mean, basically I didn't really draw it at all on this one, did I? I just drew a placeholder, but this is when she gets back home. So I was really pleased with how this one's turned out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kick this into Timelapse and just finish up this last panel here, and that's essentially how I go about creating a draft. So there you have it, folks. That's a completed draft of my manga, Future Saviours. Yeah, I'm sure many of you will have alternative methods for creating drafts for manga. I'll be more than interested to hear about those in the comments and so forth, the approaches that you use. I mean, I'm not saying that my way is the right way, it's just a way that I have over time evolved that seems to be working for me, and this process will just continue to evolve essentially. But it is a process that I have, I suppose in many respects, greatly changed over the process of doing the manga. Like I say, to start with, I would have made use of a ruler and all sorts to draw these things, but that probably was just paired with my overall drawing ability at the time, that you know, it needed a bit of assistance. And this is not to say that I have everything all sussed out now, because far from it. You know, I look forward to improving. But that's essentially how I take a storyboard, or my version of a storyboard at least, it might not be a storyboard that you recognise, into what will become a page of the manga. So I hope you found that interesting to watch. That last little panel, just for reference, even though it was time-lapse, took me in the region of about 15 minutes to draw, I reckon. So yeah, not too bad going, huh? You'll have noticed that I was also not too proud, or whatever the word would be, to erase one of Saki's mum's arms as I was working on it. I decided that the position of the arm wasn't right, or the scale of it wasn't right, so I completely redrew it. So, and that has happened throughout this process, where I have almost completed the pose and so forth, and then decided it doesn't work and just erased the whole shebang and started again. So yeah, I hope you found it interesting, and yeah, I look forward to sharing another sort of video in this vein, maybe about my inking process, or maybe that storyboarding process, or maybe how I go about writing dialogue. We'll just see how it goes. If you've got any preference, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I guess that all it means for me to say is see you soon. Peace.